Hi, welcome to Daniel's room. And today we're going to have a lesson, a theory lesson. We're going to talk about dominant seven chords. Now, this is going to be geared towards, I would guess, an intermediate to more advanced musician because I'm assuming that you know certain things before watching this episode. I'm assuming you know how to what diatonic scales are, how to harmonize scales, what triads are, what seventh chords are, what the blues scale is. The blues a blues progression is, how basic chord progressions are formed, and as well as what modes are, or at least the basic idea of what modes are. So if you do not understand what I just said, go look up online at maybe other websites or other YouTube lessons that people have online and find out what these are before coming back here. Because I'm primarily going to talk about dominant seven chords, how they function, what they do in the progression, and what they do in a song. I mean, as the way I understand it. Okay, as we all know, the basic function of a dominant seven chord is going from a 5 to a 1. So, for example, in the key of C, if we have a G7, it goes back to 1 C, right? So even if it's a minor key, most of the time, even though it's non-diatonic, most people will put a G7 chord, for example, going to a C minor chord. Okay, so that's a very basic function, a 5 to a 1. So as you can see in figure 1 here, right, very basic. Okay, you find in all songs in any key, a 5 going to 1 will be a dominant 7 chord going to a 1 chord, either major or minor. It could be a triad, it could be a G triad going to a C, but the function is still a dominant 7 function going back to the 1 chord. Okay, now let me talk about the next step. So in a lot of songs, you will find oddly, maybe in the key of C, for example, if we know that, like what I said, G is a dominant 7 chord, G7 to a C. So technically, there should be only one dominant 7 chord in any diatonic, given any diatonic key and its respective scales and chords. But sometimes you find like a D7 or F7 inside a particular chord progression. Now, those what would be called secondary dominants. So let me give you some examples. Okay, let's again just in the key of C. So if I have C chord, which is the 1 chord, going to an F, which is the 4 chord. Okay, right. A lot of times, people will actually put an F, maybe a C7 going to the F, because if it's a C going to an F, it's like a 5 chord going to a 1 chord. So in this sense, basically the F is behaving almost like a 1 chord on its own, right? So if we do that, if we put a C7 inside, in between the C and F, it sounds like this. Right? So this C7 is basically a secondary dominant. It's still functioning because it functions like a 5 chord going to a 1 chord. Okay, that's clear, right? Okay, another example, let's say I go from, again, this is C to a G7. Okay, so now a question for you. If G happens to be a 1 chord, what is its 5 chord? A D, right? So I can put a D7 there. So C, D7 to a G7. Okay, so this D7 now functions as a secondary dominant in this key, but it functions like a 5 chord to the G, which is like a pretend 1 chord. You know, do you understand what I'm saying? Let me just move on. So let's say we have a C going to an A minor. Okay, so it's 1 chord going to a 6 minor chord in the key of C. Right, same thing again. If A minor is some kind of 1, its 5 chord would be an E, right? An E7. So I can do that. I can play a C to an E7 to an A minor. So in this case, in the key of C, this is actually a 3-7 chord, 3 dominant 7 chord, but it basically behaves like a 1 chord to the 6 chord. Okay? It's like a 5 to a 1, E7 to A minor. Okay? I just move on C, from C, let's say, to a B flat. Okay? So C to like some kind of flat 7 major, right? Now the 5 of B flat is F. So if I put a C then put F7, then to a B flat. Alright, so diatonically, in the key of C, the 4 chord should be F minor, right? But now we have a F7, alright, which is basically like a pretend, I guess, a 5 going to the 1, which is the B flat in this case. Okay, so you can see that in figure 5. Okay, let me move on. Okay, so let's say the next one we do is a C to a D minor. So it's a 1 chord to a 2 minor chord, diatonic, right? If I assume D is some kind of 1, its 5 chord would be A, right? So I can actually put an A7 there. C, A7 to a D minor. Okay, so if I write it out on paper, it's basically a 1 chord to a 6-7 chord to a 2 minor chord. But in essence, what's happening is the 6-7 chord is behaving like a 5 chord to the 1 chord. Okay, I'll give you maybe one more example here. Let's say I do a 1 to a 3 minor. Again, diatonic, very common progression. Okay, if I have a 5 chord going to this E, which will be a B going to E. So in essence, I can play a C to a B7 to an E minor. Very Beatles, right? A lot of Beatles songs have this. Okay, so C to a B7 to an E minor. So if I were to write it out, it's basically a one major chord to a 7-7 chord to a 3 minor chord. But again, this chord actually, this B7 is actually functioning like a 5 chord to the 1. Okay, so everything I explained just now is basically, they're all functioning in the sense that they're going from a 5 chord to some kind of 1 chord. But they're all secondary dominants because diatonically in the key of C, they are not they're not a primary dominant 7 chord, which is G. Another way of talking about functioning chords is what you call a flat 5 substitute. So if I play a G7, back to the G7 to a C, and then the other example I have is a D flat 7 to a C. Now if you notice, in G7, the F note is a flat 7, and the third and the B is a third. Then it goes to C, right? G7 to C. Now in the case of D flat 7, the F has become a third now, and the B has become a flat 7. So if we just play those two notes, it's the same. So what's happened is it's just basically flipped itself, okay? G7 to C and D flat 7 to C. So the only thing that's different is basically the roots. G7 to C. And then D flat 7 to C. Okay, understand so far? Okay, so these to me are grouped into, I consider them all functioning. So basically the basic dominant 7 chord, G7, in the case of C, G7, and then we have the secondary dominants, which basically function like a 5 chord to one of the other chords inside a particular chord progression, and we have the flat 5 substitute. So anytime you see some kind of dominant 7 chord that's half step away from the next chord, most likely is functioning as a flat 5 substitute. Okay, now let's talk about what I consider non-functioning dominant 7 chords. As an example, let's play section A of Girl from Ipanema. So the chords are F major 7, it goes to G7, G minor 7, G flat 7, F major 7, and G flat 7 again. So it goes like. Alright, okay, so as you can see in this progression, it's in the key of F, right? It's some kind of F. Okay, when it goes to, let's skip the first G7 for now. Let's go to G minor 7. So in the key of F, G minor 7 is the 2 minor chord, so it's diatonic. Again, we go to the second last chord, F major 7. So it's there's a 1 chord, the G minor 7 is the 2 chord, and the F major 7 is the 1 chord. Let's look at the G flat 7. So as we just mentioned, anytime you see a dominant 7 chord half step away from the next chord, it's actually basically a flat 5 sub, you know. So this one, okay, it's functioning as a flat 5 sub. So Antonio Carlos Jobim could have written a C7 instead. So if I play compared to, right, because the flat 3 and the 7th are just the flat 7, sorry, the flat 7 and the 3rd are flipped. Okay, so basically it's a flat 5 sub. So every chord in X is explained except for G7. So what is G7? So we have F major 7, going to a G7 chord, and then a G minor 7 chord. Okay, now I consider this a non-functioning dominant 7 chord because it does not actually go to any one chord. To me, the only way I can explain this is basically it's something that the composer wanted. Okay, just a sound that the composer wanted going from this to this. All right. Okay, so I call this a non-functioning dominant 7 chord. Okay, now since we're on the topic of non-functioning dominant 7 chords, let's talk about two other items, the blues and modes. Okay, the blues, let's do it in key of C, since we are still in the key of C. So the basic dominant 7 blues. I mean, there are minor blues as well, but let's talk about dominant 7 blues, the 12-bar blues. So in the key of C, then goes to the 4 chord, right? C, then the G7, 5 chord, the 4 chord. All right, so with the 12-bar blues, I always see the blues as something different, because it's almost like a genre of music on its own. So even though, well, I mean, off the bat, if you think about it, a blues progression is technically non-diatonic. There's no scale that you can harmonize to get all three dominant 7 chords. So basically, I see the blues as kind of a standalone genre, and the way the chords function as something different from, let's say, what we've been talking about. But if you think about it as well, in the key of C, when you go from one chord, which is a C7, to F7, the 4 chord, it's actually like a secondary dominant as well. It goes from C to an F, right? And then later on, when it goes from G7 and G7 to C, there's a 5 to 1 as well. Okay, so in essence, inside the blues itself, you still find your basic G to C, the 5 to 1, and also a secondary dominant from the 1 to the 1 chord to the 4 chord, which is behaving like a 1 5 to 1 as well. Now the last thing that I would consider kind of non-functioning as well are songs that are modal. So let's say, for example, I have something like okay, I just basically play, I guess, some kind of G dominant 7 sus to a G7, and then an F dominant 7 to an F7. I see this more as modal kind of chord progressions, because even though it's some kind of G, because I started in G, I don't necessarily see them as functioning and going somewhere. It's just a sound that they have as dominant 7 chords, just a modal kind of thinking, So you can, in a way, you can see it as non-functioning, but at the same time, again, it's like maybe another genre on its own. Okay, so to sum up, what we have today is basically a theoretical explanation of how I see some of these things, how I see dominant 7 chords basically functioning. Under functioning, you have the basic 5 to 1, secondary dominance, flat 5 substitutes, and then under what I call non-functioning, you have the dominant 7 chords that actually don't resolve to a 1. So to me, it's more of a compositional tool, whereby maybe the composer wants a certain sound, and so it just sticks the chord there just to get a sound that he or she wants. And as well as under so-called non-functioning, we have the blues and modes. I mean, modal kind of progressions, basically. Okay. Once again, this is just a theoretical explanation of all this. End of the day, it's still a sound that's important. You may not know how these terms are defined, but if you hear it with your ears, that's fine. Again, I'm just explaining it the way I can explain it theoretically. So when you see a chord progression, maybe what I've mentioned today, you can use it to analyze and figure out, okay, what is this here? How best can I use improvisational tools to approach a certain song or chord progression, which at some point we may talk about as well. So thanks for watching, and I hope the information in this episode has been useful for you, whether you're a guitar player, keyboard player, or you play any other instruments. Thanks for your support, and please visit my website at danielchaiguitar.com. If you have comments about this episode, please leave them below, and we will see you again soon. Bye.